report. Thanks, Amanda. So this is the NPTS team. There's Reverend Busey over in the east, and Amanda Hill, and that's me there, Michael Panzaroli. And we're part of the Office 365 community, and here's some ways to be able to get in touch. So we encourage you to be involved. This is your community, and check out the US Partner Yammer site. You'll see groups for Office 365 and also for Azure, and you see some easy vanity URLs there where you can go ahead and access those groups if you're not already a part of it. You could also sign up for our newsletter, which comes out once a month, and we try to bring you service update news and any special events or current opportunities, as well as some readiness information. You'll find some community updates there as well. You can read our blog posts on the Microsoft Partner Network, and they're centered around our monthly theme, and which brings us to this month's call on identity management. And then next month, we're going to take a look at solutions for voice in the cloud. And one last note about the sign-up and the calls. We don't have the sign-up for next month's call yet. We're looking into transitioning that to our Academy environment, or now Infopedia Media, and that's going to give us access to link and to better options for kind of sharing and consuming that content on mobile devices and so on. So look for those invites. We're going to try to make it so that you can actually sign up for all those at one shot. So for now, we'll just enjoy a live meeting, and I'll have it be Throwback Thursday. I got to give Jeff Medford credit for that one. Okay, so just to kind of recap and set the stage for today, if you were able to join us on the last call, you heard about all the changes in Fast Track V2 and getting started content. And if you didn't get a chance to see that and you'd like to, the recording is posted up on our Yammer site. And one of the things you learned as part of the service description, your customers who purchase 150 seats of Office 365, they're going to get access to the onboarding service. And it's important to remember that the onboarding service is not somebody that comes on site. It's our engineering team. It's a remote team. They provide scale and support, best practices, automated tools, and technical expertise. And we believe that the best experience for the customer is when the partners actually leverage this team to deliver the technology. And when we first announced the service at WPC, many partners got the wrong impression that we were taking over this business. And I like to show this slide, which outlines what the onboarding service actually does. And it's that last box all the way over on to your right. That's what the Fast Track onboarding service does. And I'm going to move that back so you can actually take a look and see what that is. As you can see, there's a lot of work that's part of the process, and identity is really a key component of that onboarding experience, along with related services such as infrastructure remediation of the customer environment, or MFA, or perhaps you need to integrate a third-party identity provider. And I point this out not only as a review from the last call, but also just to underscore how understanding the Office 365 identity models and providing guidance and all the related services are still very relevant for the partner, and they're not going away. It's also a great slide, not only that you can explain what the onboarding service actually does, but it can be a great opportunity to talk to your customers about managed service offerings that you can provide around an identity engagement, or really a broader onboarding or Office 365 engagement. So that was a quick recap. And now, so unfortunately, we had Paul Andrew lined up, and he had a last-minute commitment. But we are very happy to have David Brandt with us today, who will be stepping in for Andrew. He's a principal product manager here at Microsoft. And David, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And David is off mute. I'm just not hearing any audio come through on my end. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Awesome, thanks. I was just looking at the members that were joined, and I see some people that I know, which is great. I'm David Brandt. I'm Principal Product Manager for Office 365. I focus on Active Directory and all the different identity management products at Microsoft, specifically in the cloud. And I help large customers work through hard problems and that type of stuff. That's the team that I'm on, is more of an escalation team, but that's my primary focus. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. All right, so with Office 365, we have several different identity models, and what we try to do is start out at a very simple pace here. We have what's called cloud identity, and that's identity that's managed totally through the Office 365 Azure Active Directory cloud. There's 0 on-premises servers, so everything is managed in the cloud, and this is perfect for small customers. We even have some medium-sized customers that have decided to use just pure cloud identity and manage that way. We'll get more details on that here in a second. This is just an overview. We also have something called Synchronized identity, and that is where we have directory synchronization with password sync from the on-premises Active Directory environment on up to the cloud. So what that means is when somebody signs into the cloud, they actually get their authentication done there because the password hash has been synced up to Office 365 from their on-premises environment, and they get signed in. This is something that we also refer to as same sign-in versus single sign-in. Now, this can be between 0 and 3 additional on-premises servers, depending on the number of users. So we'll talk more about those infrastructure requirements in a little bit. And then we have Office 365 Federated Identity, and this is where we are using federation with an on-premises identity provider. Could be Active Directory, could be other different third-party tools that we work with as part of the Works with Office 365 program, and we'll go through details on that in a little bit. But we do directory sync, so you have a copy of the directory up in the cloud, but when the user signs in, they're federated and authenticated by your local identity manager, which, as I mentioned, could be AD. So those are the 3 primary identity models that we have for Office 365. The rest of the presentation is going to dive down into what these are about, what's some key things to understand, and then how do you make your decisions on what are the best ways to proceed with a customer that is joining Office 365 and you're going to do migrations for them. All right, when we look at the ecosystem of what's going on here, we have the user in the lower left-hand corner, that's Bob. We have all the different Office 365 services that are served up: SharePoint, Exchange Web Access, Exchange Mailbox Access, Outlook, Lync and Word, etc. And there's various ways of authentication in forms. One's called passive authentication. That's very common for web type applications, and then we have active authentication, which is more for the single standalone client access, etc. So when we have a user that's using, such as Bob's, trying to get access, we want to see, is he actually authorized for access? That authorization is actually done through Windows Azure Active Directory. That is the Active Directory that's hosted in the Azure cloud that Office 365 takes advantage of. We have lots of different ways of interacting with Windows Azure Active Directory. You can use WS Federation, WS Trust, Shibboleth, SAML 2.0. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can also get access to the directory itself and managing the metadata that it has, and also the Graph API is another way for interacting with Windows Azure Active Directory. Very similar to on-premises Active Directory, except for cloud-based and handling not only for Office 365, but it also handles a lot of third-party applications as well, and other applications that you might build that are hosted in Azure you can use for your authentication. So that's where the authentication is coming from. Now, in our scenarios, we have several different ways of interacting with your on-premises directory and your identity providers that are on-premises. One is through synchronization of the accounts. So if you create user Bob in the local directory, that is created up in the cloud for you. And with synchronization and password hash sync, it also syncs up Bob's password as well. Or if you're using Federation, there's a link coming back into your environment that points to your internal identity provider, whether it's Active Directory or some other third-party tool that is using the authentication for you for there. So it's kind of how the ecosystem works. Let's go back out to the synchronized identity model. And really what this is like is Bob, the user, is signing in to Office 365. And the on-premises or the IT admins have set up synchronization for both the user account and also for the password hashes as well from the on-premises directory. So when the user signs in, he's still signing into Office 365 with his username, could be bob@contoso.com. And he's presented and asked for a password. That password is actually the same password that he uses when he signs into an on-premises Active Directory or signs into another application that's hosted by his IT organization and uses Active Directory authentication. So he's not managing a separate password for his Office 365 access versus what's being hosted on the local directory. There's tools that we use called AAD Sync, which is Azure Active Directory Sync. It's the next generation of DirSync, and I'm going to go into details on that and actually show you how that's installed and configured here in a minute. This actually is the tool that takes the information from the on-premises directory and presents it to the cloud in a secure way and creates the users and manages that. And anytime something changes in the on-premises directory, such as a new user is created or a user changes their password, those changes flow up into Office 365 and is ready for interaction by the user. Now, when we do this password sync, now just understand we're not passing the password in open text form or anything like that. We're actually passing a hash, a digital hash of the password itself. So it's very secure, and we're placing those hashes up into the cloud. So when the user signs in, the information is there for them to do that for. So when you get a copy of these slides later in the notes, I actually have a link in here to a very good article that describes the whole password sync and the password hash sync model and all the security behind it. So if you have other questions, that's a great place to look at it. So, as I mentioned, installing Azure Active Directory Sync. This is a new tool that just came out about 2.5 months ago or so, and we are already doing updates for it. We have lots of features that we'll keep adding, and this eventually will replace DirSync. DirSync is the tool that people have been using for years to synchronize local on-premises Active Directory to Office 365, and this is a little bit easier to configure and has a lot more options for users and IT administrators to customize the installation. This link that's up here right there is the aka.ms/AADsync is the location where you can actually get the tool and, more importantly, get all the documentation. I would advise to read all the documentation and then look at the different community conversations that are going on around Azure AD Sync. So before installing Azure AD Sync, there's some things that you should advise your customers to do, or you can do for your customers, especially Active Directory remediation. We have a tool called IDFix, and IDFix is actually a tool that will look at a customer's on-premises Active Directory and look for all the issues that might be there that are not compatible with syncing up to Office 365. And it provides the remediation capabilities to fix those and suggestions. So IDFix is a great tool for the customers to be able to verify that they're ready to do synchronization with Active Directory in the cloud. Also, they should verify the DNS domains with Office 365. You want to do this prior to syncing because that'll preserve the UPN, which is the user principal name, such as bob@contoso.com. So you're just validating that contoso.com is actually a verified DNS domain with Office 365. We also have some work coming up that has support for directories other than Active Directory. We have two different things that you can do here. We have the Works with Office 365 Identity Program, which I have slides on later on, which documents all the third parties that we have active support and active development with that we support for their solutions. So if you've got a third-party solution, it's ready to go and work with Office 365, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But we're also adding support for other directories such as SQL access and also LDAP access. So non-active directory identity directories can also be enabled for using with AAD Sync. So if you've got a customer that Active Directory is not their primary directory service that they use, you have the capabilities of using whichever program that they use, whether it's LDAP or some other type of application that uses LDAP calls. And this is very good for, we see this a lot in government agencies, we see it a lot in educational agencies as well. So when we look at Azure AD Sync, one server is most common deployment. It is okay to install this on a domain controller. It used to be that when we did directory sync, we always asked for you to do a separate server. That's still the suggested way. However, we do now support installing both DirSync and AAD Sync on a domain controller. And that would be for smaller customers. You wouldn't want to do that for very large customers. You'd want another server just for that replication. But installing on a domain controller is okay. You could also use separate SQL Server is okay, up to 100,000 directory objects. We've raised that limit, which is good. So if you needed to have a highly available solution and you're using SQL Server on the back end, you can use SQL in that way and create a highly available scenario for your customer. You can also install this up to Azure, which is really interesting because you can have your domain controllers and also your server that's running DirSync or Azure AD Sync actually running in the cloud. You don't need to have a physical server here. So it's using virtualization in cloud and managing that for you. So that's very common, specifically for smaller shops that don't want to add the maintenance of new hardware, that type of stuff in the environment to do this. So we have clear instructions specifically up on the AAD Sync site and also on the Azure site as well on how to do that. If you're migrating from a current DirSync installation or using Forefront Identity Manager to that 2010, the installation process is an uninstall and then a reinstall. So you would uninstall DirSync and reinstall Azure AD Sync over top, and you can do it that way. But you can also do a side-by-side install if you want to, just to do object review. We advise you not to turn sync on. So if you've got a DirSync environment that's currently syncing now, it is possible to install Azure AD side-by-side, but we advise you do not turn on the final sync button for Azure AD Sync. The reason why you'd want to do this is you can now go in and still have your service running and be able to take a look at what Azure AD Sync can do for you and get the right configurations before you execute on that model. You also want your Exchange or your local on-premises Active Directory forest functional level to be set for Windows Server 2003 or higher. And so these are the things to consider before you install Azure AD Sync. We'll do just a quick demo of some slides here for installing and configuring Azure AD Sync. So when you install the product, you actually get the location for your installation path. The nice thing about Azure AD Sync is it does install all the dependencies for you. So it used to be in the past you had to do a lot of this extra installation process on your own before you installed DirSync. Well, with Azure AD Sync, we install SQL Express, which is the local database. We'll install the Sync Engine, we'll install the single sign-in assistant, and the Azure AD connector, which is all required for doing this. That's all the default installation. There is a way that you can cancel the installation and go in and modify the wizard and start and do specific installations. So if you want to add a specific service account in the domain, because Currently, the default is a local service account with a random password for the install. So if you had a service account in your local on-premises directory and up in Office 365 that you wanted to use for this, you could do it this way. You could also then have this installation use full-blown SQL, either on box or off box. And you also have a way to save the encryption keys that are used in Azure AD Sync by doing it this way. So you have a default install, which is fully wizard driven, or there's a way to start up with the parameters to give you optional advanced features on the install. So once you start the install, you're now connecting to Active Directory. So you're entering your domain information here, so contoso.com, and any user account will actually work. You don't have to have directory replication permissions. They're not required for it. So you can just enter it. Now, if you have some features that you know that you're going to use, such as working with hybrid exchange, or you're actually going to use password hash synchronization, or you're going to enable a feature called password write-back, which is enabled with Azure AD Premium, then you need to also include an account that actually has the permissions to be able to do that. Once the install starts, it's really important that you have the ability here to look at uniquely identifying your users. So really the real main rule here is that a user ID needs to be on its own and not in another forest as well. So in other words, if bob@contoso.com can't be used in another exchange or Active Directory forest that you're using synchronization from. So that's the main thing. So it has to be a unique ID. And you can do some matching of the attributes. Now, matching means that I'm looking at the local on-premises Active Directory, and I'm making sure that I'm going to match up with the users that are currently in the cloud, and also how I want to have these users synced up going forward. So we can use matching by the mail attribute, which would also be bob@contoso.com or something like that. It would be in the SMTP address that we have for the mail attribute. You can also use the object SID or the Microsoft Exchange Master Account SID attributes. And in some cases, we call these, you'll also hear this be called something as an immutable ID. And that's another thing that you can do here. You can add your own attribute. Now, just be careful with that because, once again, that attribute needs to be unique to that user across all forests that you're syncing. So once you're looking at your information across your forest, then you're matched with Azure AD. And so in this case, we're looking at the object GUID as the source anchor attribute. That is the GUID of the user. It's 24 character string that defines a unique user. And then we're matching it up with the user principal name attribute. So user principal name is also known as the SAM account, which is in this case bob@contoso.com. So those are the things that we're saying are the same. So the object GUID on the local on-premises are the same as bob@contoso.com in the cloud. So once I have that set up, I go ahead and move forward. This is just a little bit more information around the immutable ID. I've already explained most of that for you. And then we have some ability for optional features. Now, optional features, this is kind of interesting because this is where we're really different from DirSync in the past. Optional features here, we are enabling Exchange hybrid deployments. That means that I've got on-premises Active Directory and on-premises Exchange, and I also have Exchange Online. So hybrid means I have part of my organization on-premises environment and some of it in the cloud. So if I want to enable that, I would check that. Also, password write-back is a Active Directory premium feature for Azure AD. Password write-back would be if I change the password in the cloud. If I enable a user to actually change their password as they're logged into Office 365 versus changing it locally, that password write-back feature in Azure AD Premium would actually update the on-premises Active Directory with the password change. I also have the ability to look at the different applications I want to provide support for in Azure AD, and also attribute filtering. And I can limit which attributes are actually flowing to Azure AD. We get lots of requests for this feature where people are saying, you know, I'm only using Exchange Online. Why do I have to sync all this information up for SharePoint or for Link if I'm not using it? So we have that ability, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that right now. So let's take a look at some of the different things that we have access to here from Azure AD apps. So if you look at, if you want to restrict which applications you're actually syncing the on-premises directory information to up in the cloud, you have the ability here to choose which apps you actually want to enable. So Exchange Online, Dynamics, Link Online, SharePoint Online, Azure RMS, Intune, Office Pro Plus, third-party applications. When we choose third-party applications, there's actually a whole other list of those applications that I can enable. And this is an example of going in and looking at the Azure AD attributes that you would actually want to have synced up. Now, this is an advanced feature. This is not something that you just want to go in and willy-nilly say, well, I don't want that synced up to the cloud, because a lot of these are requirements for full functionality of users to be able to consume the service in Office 365. This gives you an idea, once you choose which applications you're going to sync with, which actual attributes are going to be syncing up there. So you can, there is the ability to remove those attributes, but you definitely have to look at what that functionality is. There's a lot of information up on TechNet around this information of what are the required attributes. So if you go up to the Azure AD Sync site and look at the documentation, you'll see some lists of the actual attributes and how they're used in this case. So once we've done that, you know, it's not a lot of decisions that we've had to make, and it's not a lot of clicks that we've had to do. Once we see that we are configured and ready to go, we're going to sync our local directory up to the cloud, and we have our directory services configured the way we want it, and we've enabled whichever applications we need. We go ahead and hit go, and it configures it for us. And as you see, you'll get a button here. When you hit finish, you have the option of synchronizing now. This is that button I was saying, if you're going to do a side-by-side install, do not synchronize at this point. You can, once again, you can see how to use Azure AD side-by-side with DirSync. This is just a little bit further explanation of how we do the user matching. If you're familiar with some of the directory technologies that are out there by Microsoft and other companies, they all have something in common that's usually called a metaverse, and that's a in-between state of the directories between the on-premise and some other directory source where you're actually doing the work of matching the directories together. And that connector space then is, how do we present that to the external directories? And so in this case, that would be Azure Active Directory up in the cloud. So it's just an easy way to follow the flow of how these things are done using the AD Sync engine. So once again, domain controller co-located install isn't recommended, however, it is supported. So depending on the size of the customer, if it's a small customer, 100 users or so or less, very simple to actually do the DirSync or the Azure AD Sync install on the domain controller. Once again, one server is most common, and consider using Azure up on the cloud instead of adding additional hardware services on the on-premises environment. Let's look at the federated identity model. This is where a little bit more complicated, but there's reasons why you would choose to go down this path. And instead of what we've been talking about before with sync and password sync, that is really what was called, what we also call same sign-on versus single sign-on. But a federated identity model enables something that you hear usually called single sign-on. And that's where a user signs in once, to the entire ecosystem. There's no synchronization of password hashes unless you want it, but we actually then refer that authentication back down to the on-premises directory for the authentication, and that's done through Active Directory Federation services. Another option that we've done, a lot of people like to have a second option. So if Active Directory Federation services on the on-premises environment becomes unavailable or needs to be updated, or you got some downtime or something like that, you can also enable the backup password hash sync by using the AD sync that we just had. And that enables those password hashes to be synced up to Office 365 so your users can still get access and do the authentication in the cloud that way. So it's just a little interesting way to back up your single sign-on with same sign-on. Just another option for high availability. Now, Active Directory Federation services is also much easier using AD sync, and we'll talk about this here in a second. But very important, use trained, experienced deployment staff. That's you, the partners. Use the Azure AD Connect tool, and that's the new tool that goes alongside of what we're doing here with Azure Active Directory Sync. And the Azure AD Connect tool actually has all of the engines and wizards to enable all the ADFS environment for you, which is great. Read all the TechNet deployment guidance. That could get a little bit boring for you, but just pay attention to the important parts. Make sure you understand what needs to be in place and what the prerequisites are. Only implement the Office 365 requirements. So the only certificate that's required when you use Active Directory Federation services is the SSL ticket, Secure Socket Layer Certificate. So that's an important piece there. And then prepare with firewall update permissions. So if you've got changes that you have to make in the firewalls to support those addresses and those IPs, that's something that you should be looking at too. Now, with this ability comes the ability to also make changes between these models. So if you started out with cloud identity only and you needed to have Active Directory installed on a local server on premises, you can actually switch your identity over to Synchronized identity in that case. That's where you would deploy Azure AD Sync, and you would do a hard match or a soft match of users. Now, once again, that's that user matching that we talked about, either by object GUID or by the SMTP email address. Those are ways of doing matches of the users. So you want to make sure the users are the same in the cloud as they are on premises. If you also already have synchronized identity and you want to then further federate your identity, then you would deploy Active Directory Federation services, and you can leave your password sync as enabled as a backup solution. You can move from federated identity to synchronized identity. There is a PowerShell command that allows you to move your domain over to a standard type domain for sync. It does take some time, so you want to plan for that outage. 2 hours plus 1 additional hour per 2,000 users, so you want to plan for that when you do that. So that is if you are planning to remove federated identity, ADFS, out of your environment and just depend on synchronized identities. Then you can also move from synchronized identity to cloud identity, and this is a PowerShell command, set MSL DirSync enabled, and you do that using the Office 365 commandlets, and that allows you then to just do all authentication in the cloud and nothing redirected to or synced from the local on-premises. That can take up to 72 hours to do, so you also want to think about that when you're working with a customer in that scenario. So once again, choose the simplest model for your needs. This is our recommendation. Start simple and only move to the next level as you need it. Cloud identity is the simplest model. You choose the cloud when you have no on-premises directory to worry about. There's on-premises directory restructuring going on that you don't want to depend on, or you're just simply piloting Office 365. Choose Synchronized Identity if you have an on-premises directory. Password hash sync means federation is not required, just to have the same password in the cloud. Once again, same sign-on and single sign-on. With Synchronized Identity, you're doing what's called same sign-on, so you have the same user password and identity in the cloud as on-premises. Choose password hash sync unless you have one of the scenarios that requires federation. We'll walk through those scenarios. So you would need Active Directory Federation services enabled if you already have an ADFS deployment currently in your environment, or you already use a third-party federated identity provider. There's other identity providers out there that support Office 365. I'll show you those here in just a minute. Or you use Forefront Identity Manager 2010. You may have a complex environment and that customer is using Forefront Identity Manager 2010. You would need to enable federation to do that support. Technical requirements for choosing federation. You have an on-premises integrated smart card or multi-factor authentication solution. So you've got people that are logging in by smart card only locally, or you're using some type of multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication where you enter an ID and then you get prompted back for a code that's been sent to your cell phone or something like that. That would require ADFS. Or if you have custom hybrid applications or hybrid search, that's also required for federation. And if you also have web accessible forgotten password resets. So if you have enabled a way for getting your forgotten password reset and you need to have that interoperability with your on-premises servers, you need to use Active Directory Federation services for that. Scenarios for choosing federation, policy requirements. So you require sign-in, audit, or immediate disable. So you want to make sure if you are auditing every single login or when you disable a user on the on-premise, and you need that to happen immediately through the cloud and have immediate effect on the user that you just disabled, ADFS is a requirement there. Or if you have single sign-on, just minimizing the prompts is required, because the first time that you sign in, not using ADFS, but you're using same sign-in with synchronization, you'll get prompted for a password from the cloud. It'll be the same password that you currently use as the on-premises directory, but this ADFS then reduces that prompt. And if you have any type of client sign-in restrictions by network location or by work hours, that's another reason why you would use ADFS. And your policy prevents synchronizing password hashes to Azure AD. So if you've got some type of security policy that says, no, we're not going to allow Microsoft to move those hashes out to Azure AD, then you're going to need ADFS to be able to complete authentication through the cloud back down to the users. We got a little bit of formatting problem here. I'm sorry about that. As I mentioned, the Office 365 works with Office 365 Identity Program. This is a program that through different protocols and different standards, we have partners that have set up interoperability with Office 365, and this is supported interoperability. And so in the case of using Active Directory with Active Directory Federation services, there's a lot of different partners out there: Ping Identity, Centrify, NetLogin, Radiant, Tivoli, CA, F5. They all have supported solutions for Office 365. Now, what do we mean by that? The supported solutions is the partner themselves would actually support their tool, but we would support the use of that tool in Office 365. So our support actually works with them and also works with you on making sure that those tools work in the best way possible. If you're looking for passive authentication, just using SAML tokens, NetIQ and Shibboleth are supported, and so that is part of that program as well. So the biggest benefits here for customers is flexibility to reuse existing identity provider investments. So we do have lots of customers that use different identity providers locally. And now they have that option of continuing to use those, but also using Active Directory through Azure and Office 365. There's a link at the bottom if you need some more information about this program, and there's a lot of great detail out there. I think that's the end of what I have.
Great, thank you, David. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me, David?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. That was some great information, particularly around the Azure Active Directory Sync tool and also the new Connect tool. Those are relatively new tools, so I'm sure this was really fresh for a lot of the attendees out there, and also the guidance around the increasing support for the non-Azure Active Directory services scenarios. That's great. It's good to hear all those improvements, so appreciate that. Do you have access to the Q&A? There was a couple of questions that came up. I tried to knock off one or two of them, but can you see the Q&A and maybe respond to those in the remaining time that we have?
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now.
Okay, great.
I'm just having to get Azure Rights Management pricing on that. Yeah, I'm not covering Azure Rights Management, and I'm not an Azure Rights Management pro here, so, but I would actually assist anybody that needed assistance with that. So my email address is david.brandt, B-R-A-N-D-T, at microsoft.com. If you have a question around anything around that, you can send it to me, but be very clear on what your need is, and we'll assist you on that.
David, if we're in the manage, maybe we'll just read off the questions that were unanswered to you.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That would be okay? Okay. So the first one is from Sam, and he says, does this filtering feature allow me to not sync proxy email addresses and other Exchange fields so that I don't have to maintain an on-premises Exchange server to modify email attributes and can just modify those in Office 365?
Well, the Exchange schema needs to be installed for that support to be able to happen. So you don't need the Exchange server, but you need the support for the attributes to enable that.
Okay. Thank you. And then the next one, we have a question from Dave says, how is Poodle affecting SSL?
I'm not familiar with Poodle.
So Dave, if you want to tack on to that question, just go ahead and in the Q&A pane and add a further description, and then we'll circle back with that. So this one comes from Don. He says, it feels like it is not yet time to change from DirSync to AAD, password hash missing.
Yeah, so let me address that. Password hash is in the initial version of Azure AD. It's not in the version that supports multi-forest yet. I think that's coming in the next month or so. I don't have the exact details on that, but if you're looking for password hash sync across multiple forests back to Office 365, that support is coming.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question here from Jeremy. He says, what is the expected object sync limit per hour, and would this be another factor for choosing Federation or of synchronization?
Yeah, so object sync per hour. Truthfully, there is not a real limit that you can actually plan for because it's a very large service, and there's something out there in the Office 365 environment that interacts with Azure AD. It's called Forward Sync, and it's a service inside our service that actually is servicing all of the different customers and all the different Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Lync Online, and they implement something called throttling. And throttling can happen in many different ways. There could be an event going on in Azure AD where some process has taken much longer, and there's a lot of objects that are coming through the system, and the system automatically has a way to throttle down those queues a little bit. So that's going to adjust how many items per hour can come through the system. So is it a factor for choosing Federation and synchronization? Actually, not really. If you're using Federation and sync in that scenario, you're still going to do initial sync of all those objects up there anyways, regarding of whether you're just doing sync or federation. So it's not really that much of a factor when you look at that.
Okay, thank you. And then another question is from Max. If you're using same sign-on, do you have to switch the UPN to a publicly routed domain?
Well, that's a good question. It's been an issue in the past, and we've enabled something called alternate logon ID. And if you look up on TechNet under Office 365 or the Azure AD, we now have ability to enable a non-publicly routable domain address. So if you look at that details, that's for scenarios where maybe a government employee only can log in via smart card and they don't present a UPN or they don't present a username as they do it. They just plug their smart card into a system and the system authenticates them. We now have a way to map that up to a properly representative ID up in the cloud, and that's using what's called alternate ID. Alternate logon ID. That should solve that problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. So another question clarifying came back from Dave where he was saying, how is Poodle affecting SSL? Then he goes on to say, or does TLS cover SSL as far as Microsoft is concerned? Is it Microsoft has released an easy way to fix it for the Poodle SSL vulnerability? Just click on the link and run the Fix It for Disabling SSL 3.0. It is an easy way for you to stay safe. Please click on the link for computers at home, blah, 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 blah. Okay, does that make sense?
Looks like a little bit of, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm not a specialist in that area, so I
Okay.
have no comment.
Okay. Let's see here. I think we got another one that came in, or have we answered them? Let's see. Okay, here's another one. So Jeremy asks, future plans or timeline to integrate with Yammer for authentication?
There are plans. I don't have the exact timeline.
Okay.
That
I
work
don't
is
think we've
ongoing.
heard anything on that either. Okay. Any other questions? If you want, throw them in the Q&A. We have a few more minutes.
All right. Well, you could always post your questions on Yammer. So, David, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And those of you who are interested in the handouts for today, you can get the deck and some of the links that David referenced up in the handout section up there. That's those little note sheet-looking things in the upper right corner. And we'll have a recording available. It takes a few days for us to get it out of the Partner Learning Center, and so, but that will be posted on the Yammer site we talked about at the beginning of the call. It's the US Partner Network on the Office 365. And so any comments that you have or additional things that you'd like to see, feel free to post them on that same Yammer group, and we look forward to seeing you next month where we're going to be presenting on Voice in the Cloud. So thank you again, and appreciate everybody's attendance today, and have a great day. And thanks again, David.
Yep, thanks everybody.
Take care.